Good evening. Welcome to the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Thank you for joining us for the 8th Annual Chuck Hagel Forum in Global Leadership. I'm Dr. Randy Adkins. I'm the Senior Associate Dean of UNO's College of Arts and Sciences. I'm a professor of political science, and I'm the director of the Hagel Forum's Planning Committee. The purpose of this event is to explore critical issues with global leaders in search of solutions to today's global challenges, the kind of challenges to which Secretary Hagel has devoted his life. This evening's forum will feature opening remarks from Avril Haines, former U.S. Director of National Intelligence. She will join Secretary Hagel for a moderated discussion led by Dr. Jody Nezri-Castro, UNO Distinguished Professor of Political Science, featuring questions submitted in advance from UNO students in the campus community. This year's forum is again hosted in partnership with the Atlantic Council, a nonpartisan organization that galvanizes U.S. leadership and engagement in the world, in partnership with allies and partners to shape solutions to global challenges. At this time, please turn your attention to the screen for a welcome video from Fred Kemp, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Atlantic Council.
Good evening, Omaha. I'm Fred Kemp, President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, and I'm joining you tonight from our headquarters in Washington, D.C. for the 8th Annual Chuck Hagel Forum in Global Leadership, hosted by the University of Nebraska at Omaha in partnership with the Atlantic Council. We're honored to work with the University of Nebraska at Omaha again this year on tonight's timely and important event. The Atlantic Council was founded in 1961 during the first year of the Kennedy administration. During our 65-year history, we've been guided by our enduring mission of promoting constructive U.S. leadership in the world alongside partners and allies to shape a better future. This mission is more critical than ever, and tonight you will hear from two leaders who've dedicated their careers to advancing that brand of American leadership and to protecting our national security. Secretary Chuck Hagel is a proud son of Nebraska, an esteemed statesman and strategist who I've had the pleasure of working with in common cause for many years. From his decorated service in Vietnam, to his 2 terms in the United States Senate, to his tenure as the 24th Secretary of Defense, Secretary Hagel has demonstrated his commitment to the country's highest ideals and to the role America plays in maintaining peace and security around the world. He served as the Atlantic Council's chairman from 2009 to 2013, and he continues to serve at the Atlantic Council as distinguished statesman and a member of our International Advisory Board. Tonight, Secretary Hagel will be joined by another extraordinary public servant who has held some of the government's most important national security positions. In so doing, she has blazed a path for countless other women in her field. Former Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines. As Director of National Intelligence from 2021 to 2025, Avril Haines oversaw the U.S. intelligence community and was the Chief Intelligence Advisor to President Joe Biden. She was the first woman ever to hold that role. Director Haines has held numerous other high-ranking positions, including Principal Deputy National Security Advisor, Legal Advisor to the National Security Council, and Deputy Director of the CIA, the first woman to hold that role as well. Director Haines is one of the country's foremost experts on how to use new technologies to improve intelligence collection and counter adversaries and emerging threats. She is trusted by members of both parties for her judgment and for her integrity. I'm particularly proud that she serves as a member of the Atlantic Council's International Advisory Board alongside Secretary Hagel. I can think of few leaders better suited to discuss this critical moment for the United States and the world than Secretary Chuck Hagel and Director Avril Haines. The Atlantic Council is proud to join forces again with the University of Nebraska at Omaha to host this latest installment of the Chuck Hagel Forum in Global Leadership in Omaha, Nebraska. Now back to you.
And now it's my honor to introduce a leader whose vision and impact continue to shape the future of higher education at the University of Nebraska at Omaha and beyond. Dr. Joanne Lee became the University of Nebraska at Omaha's 16th Chancellor in July 2021. She is an internationally recognized leader committed to transforming communities and empowering students through enhancing access to higher education, developing strategic workforce programs, and inspiring lifelong learning. Dr. Lee is a chartered financial analyst, or CFA, and is a highly engaged leader and scholar who lends her expertise and experience to a wide array of causes and organizations. To name a few, she is currently a member of the Higher Learning Commission's Board of Trustees and the chair of the Committee on Strategies. Dr. Lee has been appointed to the Kansas City Federal Reserve Bank Omaha Branch Board of Directors, the Coalition of Urban and Metropolitan University Board of Directors, and to the United States Strategic Command Consultation Committee. In 2024, she became an American Association of State Colleges and Universities Council of State Representative, and in 2026, she joined the Finance Committee. Please join me in welcoming UNO's 16th Chancellor, Dr. Joanne Lee.
Thank you, Randy, and otherwise known as Joe. Thank you all for being here tonight and joining us for the Chuck Hagel Forum in Global Leadership at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. I'm going to say this sentence very slowly. It is truly an honor to welcome back Secretary Hagel, a proud Maverick, whose leadership, service, and continued investment in this forum reflect a deep commitment to UNO, to our students, and more importantly, to engage in a meaningful public dialogue. We're grateful to have Avril Haines, our director, this evening. Thank you for sharing your time, Avril, and your perspective as part of this important conversation. Thank you to Jody, who will be our wonderful moderator. And thank you to our Dean Melanie Bloom and the College of Arts and Science for hosting this signature forum. This event matters because it brings global leaders and critical issues directly to our campus, creating a space for thoughtful conversations and real-world learning. Students, faculty, staff, this is an opportunity to listen to leaders who are shaping national and global policy, an experience that reflects UNO's mission as the only metropolitan university in the University of Nebraska system. We are dedicated to engagement and impact. Secretary Hagel's connection to UNO and his belief in the power of informed conversation continues to elevate today and many, many forums to come. Once again, thank you for being here. University of Nebraska at Omaha is committed to speak the truth. We are here to promote different perspectives. So I encourage you to engage tonight to your fellow participant, and that is exactly what's going to make this forum very meaningful. Thank you and welcome again.
Well, now it's my honor to introduce the very person that has brought us here together today. A fellow UNO Maverick, a servant leader, and a true example of what it looks like to serve our community and our country. Chuck Hagel was the 24th United States Secretary of Defense. He's the only Vietnam veteran and the very first enlisted combat veteran to serve in that position. Prior to serving as Secretary of Defense, Secretary Hagel served 2 terms in the United States Senate, representing the state of Nebraska, as co-chairman of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board, and as the Deputy Administrator of the Veterans Administration. Secretary Hagel has pursued many opportunities to be actively engaged within the spheres of global leadership in our community, our state, our nation, and the world. Secretary Hagel was born in North Platte, Nebraska. He's the oldest of 4 brothers. He graduated from St. Bonaventure High School in Columbus, Nebraska in 1964, and he is a 1971 graduate of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Please join me in welcoming Secretary Chuck Hagel.
Randy, thank you. And to you, Chancellor, thank you for your leadership and what you mean to this community, and to all who are here tonight. I am certainly grateful as an individual who has had the opportunity to host this event now for the last 8 years. As a UNO graduate, to see this kind of support that keeps getting stronger and stronger each year for this institution. But probably more than anything else, I appreciate your involvement and your attendance because it's important for the future of this country, for democracy, a thinking, vibrant, active democracy that cares about laws, cares about order, cares about trust, cares about the foundations of who we are as a society, and certainly as a country. I have, and I say again, the true privilege tonight of introducing you to someone who I've worked with and known for many years, remarkable leader, but first, a remarkable human being, someone that everyone in this room would enjoy getting to know, would enjoy very much calling her, that's my sister. I don't know about my wife, but that's up to you. But she's just special. And I very much appreciate her taking the time to get here. She had a tough flight in. She was supposed to come in late last night. Plane was delayed in Washington. Plane was canceled in Chicago. She got into Chicago late last night, and they said, well, you're going to need to find a room tonight, which they did. They found her a room. So she had to then come in on another flight finally today. That's one thing. But she now is in Oxford, England, and is there for about a year on a special project, a sabbatical. And she and her husband are there, and then she, once a month, comes back to the United States and does a day of lectures at Columbia University. So to work this into her schedule was not an easy process. So I'm certainly grateful to her for that. But let me just, before I ask her to come out, add one thing to her background as I have known it, as you will get to know it tonight. Yes, she's brilliant. Yes, she's exerted tremendous leadership in everything she's done. The big jobs that you heard Fred Kemp articulate, some of those, not all of them, but some of them. And those of you who picked up a program tonight know more in depth about her experience. But one of the remarkable things about her that I've always appreciated in the years and years that I've worked with her in different capacities is her judgment. And I've always felt that leadership requisites are many, but the three most important in my mind are character, start with. I mean, that's not even close. You want your leader to have character. Second is courage. And third is judgment. And she possesses all three of those characteristics. So she's been a role model for everyone who has worked with her. And I think especially a role model for women. And you heard Fred say tonight that she was the first woman National Director of Intelligence, but a number of positions she's held, she was the first woman. So all that says, of course, and then I'll let you make your own decision about her tonight, that we have a very special person with us tonight, and I'm grateful that she'd take the time to come spend the evening and the day with us. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, Director Avril Haines.
That was too long. Oh, God. Okay.
Thank you so much. That was too much. It's really an honor to be here for the Hagel Forum. And I want to say at the outset that speaking in Chuck Hagel's name feels like both a privilege and a responsibility. Because Chuck Hagel represents something that we don't celebrate enough in American public life. The willingness to say hard things, to serve without a script, and to put the country ahead of any narrow interest. And I'll come back to him as I get further. It's a little bit of payback also for the introduction. But I want to start with a question. It's not a rhetorical one. It's really a genuine question I've been thinking about, which is, what has the United States meant to the world? Not what it has done, not its power, its economy, its military reach. What has it meant as an idea, as a promise, as a source of something that people in other countries, in other circumstances, have called hope? Let me take you back to 1831. A young French aristocrat named Alexis de Tocqueville set sail for America, officially to study its prison system, but really to understand something he thought might determine the fate of Western civilization, whether democracy could actually work. He came as a skeptic. He left as something closer to a convert. And what he found was not perfection. He found contradiction, inequality, the brutal weight of slavery pressing against every ideal the founders had proclaimed. But he also found something he hadn't expected, a country where ordinary people had been given and had seized the responsibility of governing themselves. And he understood, before most of his contemporaries did, that what he was watching in America would eventually become the question that every nation on earth would have to answer. Tocqueville wrote that America's greatness lay not in being more enlightened than any other nation, but in its ability to repair its faults. And that phrase has always struck me as the most honest and the most demanding thing ever said about this country. It doesn't say we get it right. It says we have a mechanism, constitutional, moral, civic, for getting it more right over time. And that is what the world has been watching, and for a long time, we've given the world hope. Over the decades that followed, leaders and writers from across the world would return to this theme, that America mattered not only for what it was, but for what it pointed toward. Proof that a society built on principle rather than ethnicity, race, or religion could work. Countries around the world were inspired by our example and incorporated the ideals expressed in our founding documents in their own systems. Winston Churchill understood this with the particular intensity of someone who had watched Europe descend into darkness. In October 1938, broadcasting directly to the American people, as Hitler dismembered Czechoslovakia, broadcasting because he had lost his platform in Parliament, had no official position, and was speaking against the current, Churchill said, "If ever there was a time when men and women who cherished the ideals of the founders of the British and American constitutions should take earnest counsel with one another, that time is now." 3 years later, speaking to a joint session of Congress weeks after Pearl Harbor, he told the American people that their entry into the war had done something more than shift the military balance. He said the United States, united as never before, had drawn the sword for freedom and cast away the scabbard, and that this fact had led the subjugated peoples of Europe to lift up their heads again in hope. Think about what that meant in the darkness of Nazi occupation, to lift up your head in hope. And Churchill wasn't just describing a military alliance, he was describing the moral function that American credibility served in the world. The idea that there was a country out there that stood for something, that had chosen a side that could be believed. And together we defeated authoritarianism. And then there is Václav Havel, playwright, prisoner, and eventually president of a free Czechoslovakia, one of the most remarkable political stories of the 20th century. In February 1990, just months after being released from prison, he addressed a joint session of Congress. The speech received 17 standing ovations. He described America not as a geopolitical power, but as a model of freedom and individual dignity. He spoke of our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, our Bill of Rights, our Constitution, which had inspired so many around the world, including him and countless other dissidents behind the Iron Curtain, inspiring them, as he said, to be citizens. Havel reflected on the fact that no democracy is perfect, but he took note of the progress we had made and the responsibility that flowed from this, and the gratitude he felt for our example, which he knew had come at a cost. Nelson Mandela also addressed Congress and spoke of his own vision of a free South Africa modeled on American democratic ideals, often drawing on America's civil rights tradition as a mirror and inspiration for his own struggle. And just a few years ago, the former Prime Minister of Japan spoke to our Congress expressing similar views. Then Prime Minister Kishida said that the United States could champion freedom and democracy, encourage the stability and prosperity of nations, including Japan, and when necessary, made noble sacrifices to fulfill its commitment to a better world. And when the next generation of leaders around the world, in Berlin and Seoul and Nairobi and Kyiv, look back at this period in American history, what do you want them to say about us? Because here is what I know from having spent years working in national security. The world's perception of the United States is not a vanity metric. It's a strategic asset. And when it erodes, the consequences are concrete and dangerous. Our alliances, NATO, our partnership in the Indo-Pacific, our bilateral relationships across every region are not just transactional arrangements. They are built on something more foundational, the belief that America's word means something, that its commitments endure across administrations, that it is capable of sacrificing short-term advantage for the preservation of a shared order that benefits everyone, that we are inspired by the principles we stand for and mean to live by them. When allies start to doubt that, when they begin to wonder whether America is a reliable partner or a fair-weather hegemon, they don't wait, they hedge. They diversify their security relationships, they accommodate adversaries they might otherwise resist, and the vacuum that opens is not neutral. It gets filled by actors who do not share our values and do not subscribe to the rules-based order that America built at enormous cost after 1945. This is not abstract. It's the Kindleberger trap. The risk that when the leading power steps back from providing global public goods, not just military security, but the governance frameworks, the economic rules, the credible arbitration of disputes, the system doesn't smoothly redistribute those functions to others, it degrades, and the degradation is costly in ways that fall hardest on the people with the least capacity to absorb them. This does not mean that the order is or should be static. The rules-based order should evolve and new frameworks established, but the UN Charter and the agreements we helped draft as basis for an international system that benefits us as much or more than any other state should be respected until we offer an alternative and do the hard work needed with our allies and partners to bring them with us so that they know that we remain committed to not only our own success, but to theirs as well. So I've been wondering, is this another Iron Curtain speech moment? Churchill gave that speech in 1946 in Fulton, Missouri, before a somewhat reluctant American audience that was exhausted by war, skeptical of renewed entanglement. He said things that were unwelcome, that an Iron Curtain had descended across Europe, that the Soviets would exploit any weakness, and that the only answer was an enduring, principled partnership between our countries. He was largely right, and the world he helped describe and to build held, imperfectly, at great cost, but it held, for nearly half a century. And what Churchill called for in that speech was earnest counsel, not cheerleading, not messaging, but honest reckoning with what was at stake and what it would require of us. The Iron Curtain speech wasn't about nostalgia for the wartime alliance. It was about the future, about what kind of world the next generation would inherit, and whether our democracies had the will and the wisdom to shape it. In that future, what Churchill called humanity's common inheritance, the principles of freedom of speech and thought, of courts independent of political power, of governments that derive their legitimacy from the consent of the governed, those principles are not self-executing. They don't maintain themselves. They have to be chosen, protected, and renewed by every generation. And this generation has to make that choice in an environment of extraordinary complexity and uncertainty. The world you're inheriting is changing at a pace that it is hard to comprehend. It is genuinely difficult and complicated. We are navigating the largest technological transition since industrialization, with artificial intelligence reshaping every domain of human activity, economic, military, social, cognitive, faster than our institutions were built to adapt. We face an adversarial competition with China that is structural and long-term. We are watching democratic norms erode in countries we once held up as models. Climate stress is already generating the migration pressures and resource conflicts that analysts have been warning about for decades. And we are doing all of this at a moment when trust in institutions, including the institutions of American democracy, is at an historic low. And I won't pretend that these things aren't true, but here's what else is true. These are precisely the conditions in which individual agency matters most. When structures are stable and the path is clear, any competent person can navigate it. It is in moments of genuine uncertainty, when the old frameworks no longer hold and the new ones haven't yet formed, that the people who are willing to engage, who are willing to go toward the problem rather than away from it, who are genuinely committed to something larger than their own advancement, can bend the trajectory of history. Martin Luther King understood this. He said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And he understood that it bends because people make it bend, not by waiting, not by observing from a safe distance, but by engaging fully, personally, at real cost with the injustices of their time. AI is a perfect example of this. It presents a genuine governance challenge, one that touches democratic integrity, economic fairness, national security, the future of human autonomy. The people who will shape how that challenge is navigated are not going to be the ones who wait on the sidelines until a framework appears. They are going to be the people who go into government, into the private sector, into international organizations, into the rooms where those decisions are being made, and who bring both technical sophistication and moral seriousness to the table, who ask not only what is technically possible, but what is the right thing to do for whom and according to what principles. This is a moment that rewards people who enter public life, who understand that you will live a far richer life if you are focused on what you are giving rather than what you are getting. People who are not doing the calculation of what their service will do for their career, but what it will do for the people they're meant to serve, who are not afraid to be seen caring, who recognize that the desire to serve others is not a weakness to be hidden, but a strength to be led from, and who are willing to engage to bend the arc of history. And this brings me back to Secretary Hagel, someone who not just understood this, but lived it, demonstrating to the rest of us what it means to be a citizen and a public servant. I first met Senator Hagel when he served on the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, though I am confident I remember better than he does. It's not because I'm making a comment about age, but I was a staffer at the time, sitting on the back bench, and still, as a staffer, you see a great deal that often goes unnoticed, and all of us, as a result, were enormous fans of Senator Hagel. He was reliably focused on what mattered. He unfailingly listened to anybody who had a good idea. He was someone who genuinely trying to work out the right answers to hard questions to make us better. And his fundamental integrity was present throughout, but perhaps most publicly demonstrated when he concluded that the Iraq War was failing, and simply said so at real political cost. He put his judgment ahead of his ambition, and it was inspiring. I also had the chance to observe him as the Secretary of Defense, and again, I couldn't think of a better leader or model for those of us working around him. His personal ethics, his willingness to stand by those he worked with, to accept accountability and responsibility for the remarkable authority he wielded in the positions he held, to recognize and embrace calculated risks, to be a model of selfless service, and to be compassionate, had far more impact on a day-to-day basis than I can properly relay. Just as our country has for generations served as a beacon, so have leaders like Secretary Hagel for us in public service. People who remind us why we are doing what we're doing and ultimately put meaning into the words contained in our founding documents. Plenty of governments have founding documents that reflect many of the aspirations contained in ours and yet rarely live by them, or have leaders who are willing to sacrifice their own aspirations or interests in service of others, particularly to rail against injustice that they themselves are not subject to for various reasons. And such leaders, in my view, speak to our better angels, and we are better for their doing so. I believe that the instinct toward justice and solidarity and sacrifice for something larger than oneself is as fundamental to human nature as any darker impulse. The question is whether we cultivate it in ourselves, in our institutions, in our culture. And the world needs American leadership right now, not because America is always right, Tocqueville was clear about that, but because the alternative is a world without a credible champion of the principles that allow free people to govern themselves. A world that tends to slide, not dramatically, but incrementally, toward arrangements in which the powerful make the rules and the rules serve only the powerful. You're the generation that gets to decide whether that happens. You're the people who will be in the rooms, in the State Department, in the Pentagon, in the intelligence community, in international organizations, in the private sector making decisions with global consequence when those choices are made. And how you choose, not just what you decide, but the spirit in which you decide it, the values you carry into those rooms will matter enormously. So I'll close with this. Churchill asked his generation to take earnest counsel with one another at a moment of danger. Havel told Americans from the vantage point of someone who had paid dearly for his freedom that their 200-year democratic journey was itself an extraordinary gift, a gift that carried with it an obligation. Tocqueville told us that America's greatness was its capacity for self-correction. All of that is still true. The gift is still there. The obligation is still real. The capacity for self-correction has not disappeared, even if it is being tested. What has to happen now is what has always had to happen at these inflection points. People of conscience, people of courage, people with the patience and the humility to learn from the world and not just instruct it. Those people have to choose engagement over detachment, service over comfort, and the hard, long work of democratic self-governance over the easier path of disillusionment. Thank you so much.
Once again, let's please give our thanks to Avril Haines for her remarks. I'd like to now welcome you to the second portion of this evening's event. My name is Jody Nethery Castro. I'm a professor of political science here at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and it is my great honor tonight to moderate this conversation with both of you here at the 8th Annual Chuck Hagel Forum in Global Leadership. I'd like to briefly frame our discussion on U.S. leadership in today's global environment, especially since we're joined by two leaders who have seen these issues from the inside. We're no longer in that post-Cold War moment when U.S. dominance was largely unquestioned. Avril referred to some of this in her wonderful remarks. But today's landscape is more contested and more complex. The rise of China is central, but it's not the whole story. Many countries are asserting greater independence, and global influence is more diffuse across states, institutions, and even non-state actors. Recent military operations in Venezuela and the intensifying conflict with Iran demonstrate how the U.S. is actively redefining the models of global security. The U.S. must navigate a volatile international system where traditional alliances and power structures are being actively questioned and tested. At the same time, the U.S. still brings unmatched strengths to the table. Our alliance network that you mentioned, the military reach, our innovative economy, and the ability to convene partners remain significant sources of influence. So the question is, how does and should the U.S. lead under very conditions at this moment? As was remarked earlier, we invited University of Nebraska to Omaha students to reflect on how these challenges affect America's role as a global leader, and we invited questions from them. We received several thoughtful questions, and in many cases combined these to try to cover a broader range of topics. So with that, let me turn to our speakers to help us better understand the realities of global leadership. Former Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel and his guest, former Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines. Without further ado, let's begin. In your remarks, you mentioned, Director Haines, that effective, principled, courageous leadership by the United States must continue in this crowded and competitive world. Maybe I'll give you a break, but I'd like to ask both of you to maybe talk a little bit about, more broadly, what does that look like? What does that effective and courageous U.S. leadership look like today? What should it look like?
I think it starts like all things in life, but at a leadership level, it's, as I really kind of noted in my introduction, it starts, and you really brought out a number of points too in your comments, with character, I think. So you say, well, what do you mean? You mean find character? Well, character is more than just being honest and decent, and all that we admire in a human being. More than that in leadership. It's about also being governed by the right things as a leader. The honesty of the principles behind, the foundations behind leadership. And like all things in life, trust, as you noted, is the golden currency. And trust is most important in everything, but in leadership, it's critically important, leadership. And so leaders have to understand that and what they're doing, how they're. Oh, I thought I was getting yanked already. Hung up. You can't be too careful, right?
Say, I know that's
But that component of trust is where you start, I think, at least in my answer to your question. From there, in the leadership and the character and the honesty and that is included in all that, then comes the next part of listening to people and respecting people, and not believing that you're the smartest person in the room. We have both witnessed people who have thought that, and it rarely works out well for them. And it's a devastating defect of leadership. And unfortunately, we see too many people, and especially at the public service level, in high positions, that believe that they're smarter than everybody else. No, leadership is about listening to people, but also be grounded with what most of us were raised with, the foundational factors that your mother and father taught you. Be honest, be a good person, and all that goes with that. And last point I would make, leadership also requires an understanding, and I mentioned this in my comments, that at certain points in that leadership, you're going to have to show some courage, because you will face opposition and some maybe rough opposition, but you've got to have the commitment enough and enough courage and enough character inside you to believe in what you're saying and believe in what you're doing, not for you, but for the cause or who you represent, what you represent in public service or wherever that leadership emanates from. So I think, and I picked up bad habits in the Senate. I meander around too much and talk too long on these things, but I'd summarize just by saying everything I said, I think, is the answer, at least in my opinion, to your question. You put all that together, and that's leadership. And then I truly will end with this. One of the things that Avril said was so important for the world as the world views us. Once you lose that leadership in the world because you have lost the trust of the world, and other nations and people will start making accommodations because they feel they have to, because they can't trust us anymore. They can't trust our word anymore. Rarely do you ever get that back. And in the world that we live in today, as Avril also said, you rarely have the time that we have normally had in our 250-year history to self-correct, because the time isn't there. The world that we live in today is so immediate. Everything is driven by the immediacy, whether it's social media or artificial intelligence. And so I think all of those components, at least in my opinion, are the answer to your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And maybe just add, points of emphasis in a sense. I think much as your question sets us up, we are at a point that is highly contested, right? I think we've got now more state-based conflicts than we've had since World War II. I think it's 61. That's in even the annual threat assessment that's just been released by the administration. And we're at a point where I think there is a desire for leadership, right, around the world. And much as Secretary Hagel is saying, when you have that situation, the key element is this this question of how you actually collaborate and coordinate in order to exercise that leadership, right? And something that Secretary Hagel does naturally, and that I've seen him do over the years, is consult with people, bring them along, have a conversation in which you're able to incorporate those ideas into a broader effort to, take action in a space. And I think in many respects, the answer to how do you lead in this moment is you do that you're somebody that people perceive as trustworthy and engaging in its integrity to try to solve the problems that exist, and you work with others to try to achieve answers to those problems. And it's much harder than it sounds, obviously, but it is absolutely crucial to really having an impact in the world today. And I do think it's one of the things that we're losing a little bit of right now in this context, and it's crucially important. And it's also, for people that have both in the military and in the intelligence communities, we have built up a lot of infrastructure globally to promote collaboration and relationships. It is absolutely true that in many respects we've become, over the time, we were really kind of the hub of our alliance structure and facilitated so much of it. And I think we're shifting a bit towards a more network strategy. That's not a terrible thing, but I do think that having kind of the glue that allows you to work together is crucially important. And also to your point in your question about sort of we're on a historical arc and where we are today matters in a sense. There just isn't a problem that I can think of today in national security for which you aren't better working it with partners and allies. So that relationship is fundamental to our capacity to manage the threats that we're facing in this day.
Yeah, thank you both. I think you may have already answered this a little bit, so I don't want to ask you to reiterate this, but maybe from each of your professional perspectives, what feels most different today about today's strategic environment compared to when you were in your roles in government?
Well, I'd repeat maybe a little bit of what I said in what Avril just noted in answering your first questions. The immediacy of everything. That you don't have the time in many cases that we've essentially taken for granted. That's one. And I think also, as I've kind of observed and participated, all my life in different things, we have been drifting to a point in this country where we just have taken for granted so much. The further we get away from World War II and recognize what that generation had to do to preserve freedom, not just in this country, in the world. We have. I just think it's no one's fault. It's just that the society and technology has just pushed us away more and more from really reflecting on that. Social media. Now, we're not going to go backward and say, well, we shouldn't have that, so let's just cut it all off. No, I mean, that's one of the reasons we've been successful as a society and a country for 250 years, and I know in the span of history that's not much. But we've gotten better, I think. I don't think we've gotten worse. We've gotten better. And I think partly the reason we've gotten better, and it ties to your question, is because we recognize what's gone before. We've had to get better. When we have 27 amendments to the Constitution, because we've had to fix some things. We didn't get it all right the first time. I mean, in one case, it took us a while to figure out that Americans liked alcohol. And so we had 2 amendments to fix that problem. But seriously, I think that's a part of this too. And the last point I'd make on this, I think there has been kind of a de-emphasizing of public service. And as I observe Nebraska, I still stay close to this state and back and forth, but I observe it around the country, places I go, people I listen to. Public service, I don't know, maybe it's just, maybe I'm sounding like my grandfather did, but that not to say that future generations were better, not at all. But I just think maybe there was a more of an emphasis on public service. And whose fault is that? Well, I don't think it's any one person or one institution. I think it's all of us. And I think institutions have a role in that. Universities, high schools, the schools, I mean, to teach things other than just the sophistication of society that you're going to be engaged in to make a living, be prosperous in life, have a happy life. So you got to know about computers and you have to know about all these things. But, do we still give the same emphasis to history? where'd we come from, and how'd we get here? I don't mean you need a PhD in history, but it's just basic stuff. Civics, government's included in it. I think we've let that kind of drift, and so therefore you have young generation after generation. Well, it's been no emphasis at school. Must not be a big deal. You've always been here. I mean, what's the problem? So those would be some of my thoughts on why and what we're doing, and I think what we need to do to get some of this turned around.
Thank you. We appreciate some of the emphasis that you've helped bring to campus on civic engagement, public service. Want to give a shout out to you for the initiatives that you've done here at UNO. And I want to give you a chance too, Director Haines, to maybe talk a little bit about, just what you see that feels different in this strategic environment.
Yeah, so maybe two additional things. One is being in the intelligence community, this will be a little bit of a parochial answer, which is to say that as the world has become increasingly connected, as through a variety of different means, our capacity to forecast essentially the impact of different activities has become harder and harder. And we would talk about this kind of within the analytic community as a kind of a systems effect, where often, whether it's a health issue or a terrorist issue or other types of threats, have just astonishingly broad impact in ways that you don't necessarily anticipate. You look at the war in Ukraine and realize that we ended up spending a fair amount of time focused on food security globally and how it was being impacted as a consequence of the conflict in that space. Every conflict, no matter really how small it is in today's world, has kind of global impact because there are so many different supply chains and other issues. And that just makes it so much more challenging, honestly, to do the kind of work that gets done in the intelligence community to really help policymakers think through some of the really challenging issues that they're facing. And that is something that I think is sort of, continually exacerbated by things like AI, where we recognize there's a significant amount of uncertainty and potentially global impact in a variety of different ways, and getting your head around these issues, just becomes very complicated and important. So that is one aspect of what I think is changing and moving forward. The other is honestly domestic political dysfunction, which is to say that over the course of my own career, I found increasingly it was harder just to get things done in a kind of a normal way, where there was even a majority support in Congress or otherwise, and that really does have a national security implication to it. And I think that's just something that increasingly it's sort of prompted me to spend more time thinking about how can we actually be more effective from a domestic political perspective, even though that's not my area in many respects. But
let me if I can just respond to that last point you made. I totally agree. For many reasons, but then you ask, as I have done, ask yourself the question, well, why is that?
Yeah.
What the hell happened?
Yeah.
Where I've come out on this is that we have allowed ourselves to drift into this simplistic, well, if somebody disagrees with me, he or she is the enemy, or they're stupid. And we've allowed those with the biggest megaphones to take control politically, and we've not seen enough courage from public servants to say, stop that. Yeah, we can have differences. That's a democracy, should have differences. But you've got to respect each other, and you got to treat each other with some amount of decency and dignity. And because it will eventually get to the point of paralysis,
Yeah.
where I think we are today, quite frankly, where we can't get anything done. And boy, that is really dangerous. Depending on a lot of factors, but when you have that paralysis in the decision making, where you can't make a decision because of that paralysis, well, then it paralyzes everything. And then it further adds to, and I think this is one of the biggest issues that we've got to deal with in this country, and I'll let you go to the next question, but is the lack of trust in our institutions, because this is what happens. It leads to a distrust in all institutions. You look at Gallup's polling that they do once a year on the question of
Which institutions you trust?
which institutions do you trust, or they take, I think, 15, 16 largest institutions in the country, the military, the Congress, the courts, media, and so on. And every year, those institution numbers go down and down. No trust, no trust, no trust. I get it. Politics is, I think Congress is 9%. Okay. But really, when you have a lack of trust in your judicial system, in the media, big business, so on, then a society's in trouble. Because then what that does, and I will end with this, because that sets up authoritarianism. And the authoritarianism is the next step. Because that authoritarianism will produce somebody who will come along and say, let me control it all. I can fix the problems here. And I really will end with this. Something that you said in your speech about this is an incremental process.
Yeah, exactly.
This doesn't happen overnight. It's an incremental process. And at some point, you wake up and say, what the hell happened? How did that happen? Yeah. So, like I said, I'm done.
That's great. Yeah. And I don't know if this is sort of the kind of maybe what you're talking about at an individual and taking it up to the global level, perhaps. But one of the things that I know that you've been working on and are an expert in for a while, Director Haines, is the idea of how do we have ethics in foreign policy? How do those two things coincide? And I know you're working on that project out at Oxford. Can you talk a little bit more about what this means and maybe how we should be thinking about ethics in foreign policy?
Yeah, I'm very passionate about it, but I would not call myself an expert. Honestly, but it's something that I've thought a lot about over the years, and it's the project that I'm working on in Oxford started years ago, in a sense, for me, because I realized that I had been taught a lot of norms about how to engage in decision-making in the executive branch by mentors, and they had taught me habits to help me adhere, and I engaged, in discussions with people, and I realized those sort of norms are not actually easily found anyplace. There's not like a place where they're all written down, these are the norms, that you find. And they are, it's not as if they aren't written down anywhere, which is to say that you can find different aspects of them in different documents for different agencies and departments and so on. But I'll give you some examples so you understand what I mean. Across the government, civil servants are supposed to be, and particularly in the national security area, politically impartial. And you say that, but there are always questions that come up. So what does that mean, right? Because you're obviously engaging in subjects and discussions and so on that have political elements to them. How do you actually do it in a way that makes sense? And how does it differ across the national security community? In other words, within the intelligence community, you're not just politically impartial, you're supposed to provide analysis that is without policy bias. that's very interesting. That's actually very hard, right? I mean, people have been working in an area for a very long time. You start to develop views about what the policy should be. It's quite challenging to sort of say to yourself, okay, I'm supposed to not be engaging in policy. If you're in another part of the national security community, such as, working in the Secretary of Defense's office, you're allowed to talk about policy. You're a policymaker. You are still supposed to be holding politics at bay in those scenarios. And so there's all kinds of things that develop in these spaces. And what I've learned over the years is how important those habits are to adhering, frankly, to those things. In other words, one of the biggest ones that we talk about in the intelligence community is speaking truth to power, right? Like this concept of telling somebody who has more power than you, essentially, that what the analysis is when it may contradict their perspective on the world or their own analysis of circumstances. And again, it's a lot easier to say than it is to do. There's often a situation where you find yourself talking to somebody who's more senior. You've bringing forward analysis that is going to contradict their perspective, but also they've been working on policy that they've been pursuing that they thought would result in a different outcome, and you're telling them it's not working or something along those lines. And the person, you have a lot of respect for them, maybe. You think they've been in this business for a very long time. They're completely, it's appropriate for them to have their view. How do you present that analysis? Do you kind of say, well, the analysis is this, but you don't sort of spend a lot of time on it. You kind of shave the corners off of it. You sort of say it in a little bit of a nice way. You say, well, there's also this, which does, is something that you might agree with, right? You sort of spend less time on the points of disagreement and more on the points of agreement. But in fact, if you think about it, I mean, particularly I found as I've gotten older and I've realized how important it is to hear dissenting views, you realize what you really want is the analyst that comes in and challenges you and says, actually, like, here's what the analysis shows, and it seems to be completely different from what you're thinking. And here's why, and here are the points of disagreement that are sort of most refined and for which there's the greatest evidence, and here's the uncertainty that I have about this analysis, and here are the gaps and things like that, because that's going to make you think about things more deeply and actually approach them in a more effective way. And so all of that is to say that I had a lot of thoughts about, how can I spend my time after getting out of government? This might be a useful way is to sort of bring forward some of the learning that's been provided to me. But I have to say that in this moment, there's been so much focus from students or others that want to engage with me on this about how contested everything is. This question of, do we, still have ethics? Like, how do we think about it? Can a civil service even really be apolitical? Is that a thing? There's so much skepticism and cynicism about whether or not we're able to comply with some of the basic norms that we think of as so important: honesty and trustworthiness, and the kind of critical and selfless service is such an important piece of what we do, or accountability, being able to acknowledge mistakes. And, and all of these are so important. And I've realized too that as I've been thinking about this, that in many respects in these moments of contestation, it's quite interesting to see how some of these norms in a way get turned on their head and actually make it harder for us, perversely, to object to the things that are happening around us. Because in normal circumstances, we sort of have our lanes, we have our ways of thinking about things, we're trying to promote, the right kind of way of decision making. But when things get turned on their head, you start to go, well, wait a minute, that's okay, but that's not my lane, but that seems unethical. I should talk about that, right? And you haven't developed habits for how to actually engage on that. That's something unusual, that's something unexpected. And it's very interesting looking at investigations, as I've been trying to do, of where things went off the track in different countries, in different spaces, and you find that in these investigations, a lot of the time people say, well, I didn't feel comfortable sort of speaking up in that moment. It really, that wasn't my lane. That's often a kind of phrase that gets used, right? Like, I'm the lawyer, I wasn't supposed to comment on that, or I was the intelligence officer, I'm not supposed to, and we teach people, if it's unethical, that's a moment when you step out of your lane, right? But But it's not nearly as easy as it sounds. Is that policy? Is it politics? Is it ethics? And starting to think through those things. It's very interesting. So sorry, I've talked too long, but it is, I think, incredibly important to think about these issues, and I think it's so fundamental to the health of our democracy because it comes back to the trust point Secretary Hagel was making early on. I think part of the reason that you have trust in an institution is because you trust the people in that institution to do the right thing, to exercise the authority that's been delegated to them in a way that's consistent with our democracy. And that is reliant, often particularly in national security, on the ethical mores of the folks who are actually exercising those authorities. And if you want to trust your institutions, you got to make sure that you're actually cultivating that kind of ethical culture.
Absolutely. Secretary Hagel, did you want to comment on any of the aspects of ethics in maybe what you'd seen in your own experience or examples?
I think Avril really said it all, and for me, it's pretty obvious. And so, next question.
Okay. Well, then I do have.
That's the example for it. This is the best part.
Well, I do have one for you. Your Secretary Hagel, your op-ed with former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta is entitled. Yeah, some of you have read it.
Oh, thank you.
Came out today in the New York Times online, but will be in print tomorrow. I believe you told me. Entitled "Our Troops Deserve More." I wonder if you can talk about why you felt the need to speak out on this issue, and also maybe tell, for those who haven't read it, your recommendations.
Thank you. I felt it was, as someone who's had the privilege and opportunity to do a lot of things in my life in public service because, I worked hard, but I was given some opportunities. A lot of people helped me. So at the end of all that, I've always believed that each of us who've had those great opportunities and privileges still owe something back to society and to the people and process and your country that gave you those opportunities. So I'm not going to go run for any office anymore, or I'm not going to be the next Secretary of Defense again or anything. I recognize that, and that's okay. So what can I do to make a contribution? Well, one of the things I can do, and I try to stay active with different boards, like I'm on the PBS and RAND and those kind of things. I don't get any money for it, which is fine. That's great. That's the way it should be for me. But I can give something back in some way. So, you're thinking about where the country is, the issues of our time, and so on. That's really kind of what led me to thinking about this. And then, quite honestly, and then I talked to Panetta a lot. We're back and forth. I talked to Marty Dempsey, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, wonderful person. Mike Mullen, oldest people you work with, and so I just kept thinking and talking. But the opportunity came really about a week ago when the New York Times called me, and the senior editor of the New York Times editorial page asked me, what do you think, Mr. Secretary? Would you be interested in maybe getting another colleague? And the guy is, if you have some perspectives on this, from your perspective as both a former member of Congress, a veteran, and Secretary of Defense. Well, not many people have all those pieces. Doesn't mean I'm any good or was any good at any of them, but I do have that perspective on it. Panetta as well. So I said, yeah, I've got something to say. So I called Leon, and he had something to say. So that's how we came up with it. And the particular feature of the op-ed noted in the headline of it was when you look at our men and women in uniform and their families, that we all kind of just take for granted. And I understand that. It's their choice if they wanted to be in the military or not. I get that. But where are they on all this in, for example, Iran? And I don't want to make this into a political deal, but this country has not been given any reason why we went to Iran. The Congress has not been given any reason. Our allies were not consulted. No one was consulted, but yet the men and women are pressed into doing whatever they're told to do without really any, well, why are we doing this? I know what the commander-in-chief said, and the commanders say, but, well, why are we really doing this? And so what my point was, and Leon agreed with it, was that, you know, these men and women who make these great sacrifices in their families, they're owed something at least an explanation of what the hell they're doing and why, rather than just go do it. You're in the military, that's the way it's going to be, and you go do it. So I know there are other points of view on this, but that's really kind of what initially led me to this, and then there are a number of other points we make in that op-ed. But from our perspective, Panetta and my perspective, with our backgrounds and our experiences, it kind of gave us a foundation and a forum, and I think maybe some credibility to be able to make that case. And we do. I don't know how effective we did it, but we did it. But that was the deal.
Excellent. Yeah. Director Haines, I want to give you a chance to join the conversation on this. During your confirmation hearings for a Director of National Intelligence, I think you were asked a question about this, and you did say, I do not believe Iran should ever be allowed to get a nuclear weapon. I wonder, first, does that goal justify the U.S. and the conflict that the U.S. finds itself in now with Iran? And what do you think about, I don't want to ask you to prognosticate, but how do you think that this war ends? Small question.
We were talking about how challenging.
Would you like
Exactly. Yeah, I think that would be excellent. Yes, exactly. Yeah. No, I don't think it justifies this war in the sense that I continue to think that Iran should not be allowed to get a nuclear weapon. But the way we've tried to manage that over the years has been a variety of obviously different options. One is to negotiate and to do something like the JCPOA that existed, and whatever people may think of whether it was exactly the right deal, I think honestly it was a way to manage the situation and to ensure that they could not actually get a nuclear weapon without us having significant amount of warning that allowed us to then take action in the event that they had made a decision and were moving forward on it. And among the values of something like the JCPOA, much like other arms control agreements and so on, is that frankly it gives you access and the capacity to do collection that gives you greater confidence in your capacity to be able to tell the President of the United States, we have enough insight here that we have confidence that we can tell you that they haven't started doing certain things that we know they would if they were moving towards it, right? And so that is one approach. In the event that that breaks down, there are obviously other challenges. And since I wasn't in government at the time, I don't know all of the things that led up to essentially the decision of Israel to go in to take a strike on the nuclear facilities, and then obviously the president's decision to take action against Fordow. That is a strike that I at least understood in the context of, taking out some of the nuclear program, being very focused on that particular issue, and without knowing what the intelligence was at that time, I don't know whether or not it was justified. It did. In any event, more to be said. But this is this most recent action in Iran, very much as Secretary Hagel was saying, and I think one of the things that the op-ed really lays out, the opinion article, is there is no clear objective. It's very hard to understand what the objective is. And, is it removing nuclear weapon? That seems not to be the case. It sounds like the most recent statements have suggested that they're not going to go in, for example, to get the remaining nuclear material out of the ground. It's also not clear that there was any particular prompting of a greater threat, essentially, of them producing a nuclear weapon in this moment in that context. But regardless, the action that's being taken is far greater than just at the nuclear facility, right? It seemed as if regime change was part of the idea initially. Now it seems less so. It's just very hard to understand what exactly is purpose. And I think the in terms of how this evolves, it seems as if the president does want to end this as soon as possible. That seems like part of what is motivating. I think it's because it's hard to tell what the objective is. It's unclear whether or not what conditions would amount to having achieved that objective to put him in a position to then move forward. Assuming that those conditions have been met, I think the biggest challenge he's got is the Strait of Hormuz, right? Which is that in order to really bring this to an end, he's got to deal with that, and it's hard to see how that happens without some kind of negotiation, in effect, and a negotiation presumably would be predicated on the idea that they would stop taking shots at U.S. ships or other allied ships, essentially going through the Strait of Hormuz in exchange for Israel stopping their actions, right? And so that means delivering on that. In other words, is Israel willing to actually stop, and can the negotiation move forward on that basis? And then finally, I think the long-term implications that seem particularly most challenging are basically the next generation of terrorism, basically, that can come out of this because of with the weakened state and greater opportunity for recruitment and vacuums of power in the Middle East. We know what that leads to. And then also migration going. I mean, again, if we end up with a civil war there because of such a weakened state in Iran, that's a certainly significant potential, and that will affect Europe, and we know exactly what that looks like. So I think those are some of the things that I worry about long term.
Let me just add to that, because I agree with everything Avril has said. What this has produced after 4 weeks, 5 weeks, is essentially a global conflict. You now have all nations of the world affected by this in some way. Geopolitics, economics, fuel, trust, whatever. And that's building on and off what Avril said. Part of the answer to the question about why'd you guys write that op-ed?
Yeah.
Because we say some of those things in the op-ed, and that's really what's really dangerous here, because then, and we've both seen this, many people in the audience know about this, pretty easy to get into war, but damn hard to get out the right way. And we should have learned that over the fiascos that we've had over the last 50 years, Vietnam all the way through Iraq, Afghanistan. And you lose options every day as to what you can do. And so the president's in a tough spot here on this. And when you start something alone, like he's done, not consulting allies, not getting Congress's sign-off, authority for military force. I don't know, tonight I know he's going to be on TV. Maybe he's going to, 4 or 5 weeks after the war starts, he's going to explain to the American public what the whole point was. I don't know. But you can't go back and self-correct on this. Once that starts, then what happens is you lose control. You really lose control. And you just look at what's going on in the Middle East, and I mean, all those Middle Eastern countries being attacked. And I mean, that's just the Middle East. But the last point I'll make on this, and it's just to echo what Avril said, one of the real dangerous things that came out of this still going on, is a whole new generation or two of terrorists that you're creating here.
Yeah.
And you can't stop that. You cannot stop that, and you certainly can't bomb that away. That only increases more and more. And again, I guess we've not learned the history of that in this country, but it's a very difficult spot to be in, and for this country and for the world, and I don't think it gets any better soon.
I appreciate the honesty that you both going to tackle that question with. And I want to, as we're winding down the time we have remaining, one of the things that came out in the questions from our students is their interest in learning how they might one day do some of the things that both of you have done in your careers. And so maybe give a little levity to, not levity, but optimism to as we wind down the conversation. Both of you took pretty unlikely paths to national leadership, and maybe you could just talk about one or two of the circumstances or decisions that enabled your success along the way.
You should go first. Mine is much more humiliating. You have an actual path. I'm like, please.
Well, if you call humiliating, you were smart as hell. I mean, I suppose it was humiliating. Yeah, that wasn't my problem, by the way. I don't know. I was lucky in many ways. A lot of good people helped me. I mentioned earlier
Orv Menard.
Dr. Orv Menard from UNO, a professor. But I always kind of had a feeling of doing something. But I never ever thought in my life of what maybe I would end up doing. But I think it really, like all of us, we are products of our upbringing. We are products of our backgrounds. We're products of where we come from. Now you can change that, or you can get, if you have a bad upbringing or tough or whatever, you can get above that, and then you can make some mistakes. But we're really all products of a background. Your parents, what influenced your growing up, and I was fortunate that because I was born right after World War II. My dad came back from the South Pacific. He'd been over there 2.5 years. And so I was fortunate to grow up in little towns in Nebraska and be that the first phase of the baby boom generation, to see all that public service. I mean, yeah, I probably don't refer to being in the military or going to fight in World War II as public service, but it was. But it was more than that too. But my uncles did that. I mean, almost every man in the town that in Ainsworth and Rushville and these little towns of western Nebraska had some World War II experience, and that always stuck with me. I mean, it really did. But I never dwelled on it about running for office or anything else. And then when I was in Vietnam, I think that shaped me too, and I saw so many things that were wrong, and the tragedy of that war, the deaths. When my brother Tom and I were there in '68, we sent 16,000 dead Americans home in that 1 year. We were sending dead Americans home 1,000 a week. So I saw what was wrong. I mean, so many ways. I was just, a lowly sergeant, but it stuck with me. And then I just had some great people who helped me and mentored me and growing up. And I always thought, well, why not try it? I think I could do it. I mean, I think I could offer it something maybe. And if you don't try, you don't know what's going to happen. But so I mean, there are a lot more to it than that. But but I think those were some of the influencing dynamics of how I got into public service, and I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it also because of the other people in it.
Yeah, totally.
The Avril Haines of the world, and so on, other people who were in public service that I saw coming up, and was a young guy watching it all, and but was given opportunities and admired those people, and thought, boy, I mean, this is real. These people are special to do this. So yeah, I mean that probably.
Yeah,
This
and then
summary.
taking advantage of those opportunities and inspiring others as well as you have is wonderful. Can I ask you just a couple maybe quick examples?
Yeah, but one thing that you reminded me of is it's so true about sort of how what you experience when you're younger and the sort of outlook on public service and things. My father had this thing where he would say every day he would ask me, tell me something good that you did, right? Like, in other words, you helped somebody, you did something that was for somebody else. And I mean, as a kid, it really used to irritate the crap out of me. I'd have to think about, like, what on earth am I going to come up with today? And my mom was terrified because I started, like, you start to do things like you see somebody who looks like they need some help on the street, or a homeless person, or other things, like, get them to. So, and my mom is like, you're putting her in danger. You don't know what you got. Like, she's walking up to people now, like, trying to find out what they. It was hilarious, but it really made a difference. I mean, it just made your whole outlook. Like, you had to think about, who can I help and how can I do something that's useful for somebody else? And I really credit him with kind of instilling that, idea in me. And then you also find out how extraordinarily satisfying it is to have a human connection where you're actually trying to do something for somebody else, and how much more you get out of it than the person that you're trying to help often in those circumstances, and how much more it makes you feel like you're a part of a community in a way that is really extraordinary. And I did, but yeah, the humiliating part is that, I mean, I really tried everything before I went to public service. I feel like I was in science, I was in physics, I had a bookstore cafe, I did a whole variety of things, and then I went to law school, and it finally went in. And the thing about it is that, I mean, if you're considering it, I highly recommend it. First and foremost, everybody who leaves says how much they miss the people. I do think that is just a fundamental thing across the board. People don't go into public service for fame and fortune. These are folks who actually want to do something for their community, for their society. They have an interest in that kind of service, but it's also some of the smartest, thoughtful, kind of interesting people, and you get to work on really challenging issues that have meaning. And you often, my first job in government I got to do a lot of things that I had no business doing because there are just not enough people to get things done. You sort of think, like, why am I the person who's doing this? So, like, how did this go wrong? And but it is absolutely extraordinary to really sort of challenge you to be better than you might even realize you're able to be. So yeah, it's an incredible experience, and I am just so grateful I had the opportunities that I did, and lots of really wonderful people who, mentored and helped me, and it's impossible, I think, to do it without that.
Well, we sure appreciate the integrity and spirit of public service that both of you have brought to your careers and to events like this, and to the ongoing work that you're both doing with students. And so thank you so much. And I think at this point, a few thank yous are in order as we kind of wrap up here. I want to thank you both, Secretary Hagel, for joining this incredible event at our university and all you do to continue to nurture the next generation of American leaders in global affairs and public service. And thank you, Ms. Haines, for speaking to our students and our community and addressing these tough questions and important issues and the challenges that are really facing our country today. And I want to thank, finally, our students, faculty, staff, administrators, and our university partner, the Atlantic Council, all who have worked to bring you this event. Please join me in thanking this wonderful team. Oh.
Ah, that's very sweet.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
We've got one last task before this evening closes. At this time, I'd like to invite Chancellor Lee back to back to the stage for a special presentation.
So I want everybody to know we do start a tradition. Regardless what size you are, UNO premier sport is hockey. So we love to leave our special guest, Director Avril Haines, with a really gigantic hockey sweater.
You're a hockey fan now.
Awesome. Oh my God. That is huge. That is, yeah. That is pretty cool. I know, that is pretty fabulous. Woo-hoo! All right. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you all, and we'll see you next year.